In 1932, Australia, the government decides to deploy the military against an enemy threatening to destroy the nation's food supply. But here's the thing. The enemy was birds. No, seriously, not metaphorical birds, not a communist code name. Actual birds. Specifically large, flightless, profoundly stupid-looking birds called emus. The Australian Army brought the infamous Lewis machine guns and still lost the war.
Good news, everyone. We have identified the threat.
They had.
And we have a perfectly reasonable solution.
They did not.
Machine guns.
Unfortunately, that was the official government position. Now, to understand how a modern government ended up in a military standoff with flightless poultry, you need to understand the very specific chain of disasters that led to this moment. It starts with World War I. Australia sent hundreds of thousands of men to fight in Europe. The ones who actually came back to a country that owed them something. The government's brilliant solution? Land. Specifically, marginal, semi-arid land in the Western Australian interior, northeast of Perth, in a region called Campion. Marginal, though, is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Calling this place farmland is like calling a brick. Technically, a pillow. I mean, sure, it exists, but that's about all you can say for it. These were men who had survived Gallipoli, the Somme, and 4 years of industrialized slaughter. Their reward? A farm in a place where farming was, to use the technical term, borderline impossible. But they tried anyway. By 1932, about a quarter of them had already broken, given up, and left. Then, the Great Depression arrived. Wheat prices utterly collapsed. Government subsidies that had been promised did not arrive with quite the same enthusiasm. The farmers who remained were barely surviving on grit and sadness. And then, the emus arrived.
Good news. The situation can absolutely get worse.
It could. It did. Here is the emu, Dromaeus novae hollandiae, the second largest bird on Earth. They stand 6 feet tall, weigh 130 pounds, and can run at 30 miles an hour. They cannot fly, but what they can do, and this is critical, is eat. Constantly. Everything. And when 20,000 of them arrive at your farm simultaneously looking for a snack, they do not knock politely. In 1932, a severe drought pushed the annual emu migration directly into the Campion farming district. They came looking for water. They found irrigated wheat, and they decided wheat was excellent. They absolutely demolished vital fences, which immediately let hordes of rabbits in, causing even more damage. So these farmers, veterans who had survived a world war and a depression, were now being financially destroyed by massive birds. They contacted the government.
I have an idea.
History records that somebody somewhere actually did. The farmers knew exactly what they wanted. Remember, they used to be soldiers. They knew the equipment. They knew what automatic weapons could do to a dense advancing line. So they asked the government for machine guns. And the remarkable, utterly insane thing is, the government said, yes.
This is a perfectly rational solution.
They believed they did.
The Army.
The Defense Minister, Sir George Pearce, approved the operation. 3 soldiers from the Royal Australian Artillery were deployed. Their commanding officer was Major Gwynedd Purvis Wyn Aubrey Meredith, which sounds less like a gritty military officer and more like someone who inherits a very large estate and a lot of pug dogs. The soldiers brought 2 Lewis guns, the same light machine guns used in World War I, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. Their objective was straightforward: eliminate roughly 20,000 emus. Their plan was equally straightforward. Local farmers would use their trucks to herd the birds into a concentrated group, and the soldiers would open fire with the Lewis guns. Done in a few days. The official expectation, and I quote, was little difficulty.
In, out, home by dinner.
History would eventually describe this assessment as optimistic. They even sent a Fox movie-tone cameraman to film the whole operation. The government expected a glorious victory. The newsreels expected exciting footage, and Major Meredith probably expected a routine assignment. The emus had not yet been consulted. The operation was scheduled for October. Then, it rained. This was excellent for the farmers, but significantly less excellent for organized warfare against wildlife. The emus just scattered across a much wider area. The soldiers waited. Eventually, November 2nd arrived. The troops reached Campion and almost immediately spotted around 50 emus.
Urgent contact.
The plan begins. The farmers attempted to herd the birds toward the waiting machine guns. The emus looked at this arrangement and flatly declined to participate. They scattered in every direction. Major Meredith, undeterred, ordered a pursuit. The soldiers climbed into their trucks and gave chase. One of the trucks immediately crashed directly into a rabbit hole. A rabbit hole. At this point, the emus had technically claimed their first Allied victory. The remaining soldiers tried to open fire, but the range was poor, the terrain was rough, and the targets were moving extremely fast. When the dust settled, 6 emus had been killed. 6. Out of roughly 50.
Minor setback.
It was. A newspaper reported the engagement the following morning, describing it as having been carried out, quote, with tremendous enthusiasm. Seriously, the historical record is occasionally funnier than any joke you could write. Day 2 arrives. The soldiers discover what looks like a perfect opportunity. Nearly 1,000 emus gathered near a dam. This is ideal. A massive target, open ground, machine guns in position. A military officer could hardly ask for a better situation.
Now, we have them.
No, they did not. The Lewis guns opened fire. The emus immediately split into dozens of smaller groups and ran in completely different directions. And it was at this precise moment that Major Meredith discovered something nobody had apparently thought to investigate beforehand. Emus are extremely difficult to organize into neat military formations. They do not march. They do not panic. They do not politely wait in a bunch to be shot. They simply scatter and keep running. Major Meredith also made another terrifying discovery. Emus are surprisingly hard to kill. Their muscular systems allow them to keep moving even after sustaining injuries that would drop a person. Birds that should have collapsed just kept running at 20 miles an hour. Meredith's official report stated that emus face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. I would once again like to stress that he was describing birds. The Lewis guns jammed, the ground was uneven, and the trucks struggled across the terrain. The entire ambush strategy depended entirely on herding animals that absolutely, fundamentally, refused to be herded.
I have a new plan.
Literally nobody wanted to hear another plan, but unfortunately history still had several left. By November 8th, less than a week into the campaign, news of the operation had reached the Australian Parliament. This was unfortunate, not because Parliament was angry, but because Parliament thought it was hysterical. Members began discussing the campaign, with one rep stating, "If anybody deserves medals, it is the emus, who have won every round so far." I cannot improve upon that joke. That is an actual historical quotation. Parliament looked at a military operation against birds and concluded that the birds were winning.
This is clearly a public relations issue.
Oh, it was. The newspapers were having a wonderful time. The public was having a wonderful time. The emus were having what historians would technically describe as an excellent week. Major Meredith, meanwhile, was not. The operation was suspended and the major was recalled.
Tactical retreat.
It was a retreat. The farmers, however, were less amused. Their crops were still disappearing, their fences were still broken, and the emus were still treating Western Australia like an all-you-can-eat buffet. The farmers demanded the army back. Reports suggested that around 300 emus had been killed during the first operation. 300 out of roughly 20,000.
That is clearly progress.
By one interpretation of the word, yes. The government agreed to another campaign. Major Meredith returned on November 12th. Round 2.
I have reviewed our previous mistakes, and I have a new strategy.
He actually did. The major abandoned the dramatic truck pursuits, opting for smaller patrols and more targeted engagements. No more trying to persuade emus to stand in a line. This helped slightly. Sometimes they succeeded, sometimes the emus escaped, but quite often the emus noticed the soldiers first. Meredith noted this remarkable observation about his opponent, stating, "The emus have an apparently almost human watchfulness." They were essentially posting lookouts. Not officially, but a few birds would stand guard while the others fed. At the first sign of danger, they would run, and the rest followed instantly.
They are organizing. I do not like that.
Neither did Major Meredith. The campaign continued day after day. Occasionally, the soldiers won. More often, the emus simply left. The army was discovering that machine guns are extremely effective, provided your enemy politely remains in front of them. The emus refused to cooperate. Over the following weeks, the official numbers slowly increased. A few birds here, a small skirmish there, long walks, very little glory. Eventually, Major Meredith submitted his final report. Approximately 986 confirmed kills.
Victory.
Not quite. Remember, there were 20,000 emus. 19,000 or so remained on the farms.
Minor mathematical complication.
There was another horrifying number in Meredith's report. 10. As in 10 rounds of military-grade ammunition expended for every single confirmed emu kill. Thousands upon thousands of rounds, hundreds of soldiers' hours, weeks of effort, and an emu population that was, for practical purposes, still entirely functional.
I would prefer not to discuss the numbers.
The government eventually reached the same conclusion. The operation was officially declared reasonably successful. This is one of my favorite phrases in military history. The birds still occupied the farms, the crops were still being eaten, and the army was leaving. But technically, some emus had been shot.
I am calling that a win.
History would be slightly less generous. December 10th, 1932. Major Meredith was recalled for the final time. The Lewis guns went home, the trucks went home, and the cameramen went home. The remaining 19,000-odd emus continued doing exactly what they had been doing before the Australian army arrived, eating wheat, breaking fences, and ignoring military strategy. Major Meredith, a veteran of the First World War, submitted this final professional assessment. If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They could face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. I can't stress this enough. He was describing birds.
I have one final idea.
History records that humanity had not yet run out of bad ones. The army left. The emus stayed. You might assume that this was the end of the story.
I have excellent news. I have another plan.
Australia tried again. Another campaign in 1934. Another in 1938. And then history somehow found another gear. In 1943, a formal proposal was made to deal with the emu problem using, wait for it,
We can just drop bombs on them.
bombs against birds. This was an actual government proposal. It sounds professional on paper, aerial operations, but it means dropping bombs on wildlife. Fortunately, someone in government finally decided that explosive ordnance was perhaps an overreaction to unusually ambitious poultry, and the proposal was rejected.
What about more machine guns?
That idea sadly survived. Machine guns were used again in 1948. The results were almost perfectly predictable. The emus remained deeply unconcerned. Eventually, someone had an idea. A genuinely good, boring, and sensible idea.
More machine guns?
No.
Bigger machine guns?
Also, no. Fences. Just better fences. The government funded stronger fencing systems, and farmers were paid bounties to control local populations over time. No military campaigns, no tactical retreats, no parliamentary embarrassment. Just fences.
I do not care for this plan.
History rarely asks for your opinion. The emu population survived, very comfortably in fact. Today they are protected under Australian law. They also appear on Australia's official coat of arms alongside the kangaroo. Supposedly they were chosen because neither can easily walk backwards, symbolizing a nation always moving forward. The Australian Army is also technically represented on that coat of arms, but let's just say they are not making eye contact.
I still think we could take them.
History suggests otherwise. The emus have never lost a war. No nation has ever defeated them. Australia gave it their best shot. One last thing. Sir George Pearce, the defense minister who approved the operation, picked up a nickname during the whole affair that followed him for years, the Minister for the Emu War, which is rough. Conquering an empire, discovering a continent, inventing something revolutionary. These are ways to leave your name in history. Or authorizing a military campaign against birds.
I regret nothing.
I believe him. The emus, meanwhile, never officially commented on the conflict. Their silence has generally been interpreted as confidence. And somewhere in Western Australia, I like to imagine an emu looking at a 6-foot fence and remembering the time its ancestors fought an army and won. And that's another reminder that civilization should never have been left unsupervised. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next Friday.